Raise your hand if you have kids. Okay. And what I'm interested in then is, how many of you actually agree with me that it's really incumbent upon us to leave the natural resource base that we have in the U.S. in as good a shape or better shape than what we got it for future generations? Raise your hands if that makes sense to you. You see, our natural resource base really is closely related to our standard of living. We really rely on renewable natural resources to generate a lot of, especially in rural communities, a lot of our food, a lot of our activities, the goods and services that we get from these functioning ecosystems really are what cause us to have the kind of quality of life that we have. And it's really essential that we pass that quality of life on to the next generation, because if we don't, then I think in the long run we're undermining the future generations, and we can't do that.
A good plan is the first step to success. The EBIPM framework offers an outline for the plan and provides the steps to take along the way so you can reach success in your land management efforts. The 5 steps in the EBIPM model take you through each necessary phase of land management, no matter the situation in which you find yourself and the land you manage. This video will lead you through the 5 steps to develop a plan that will set you on the course to success. As you begin to think about working on the problems you face and developing a management plan, the first thought should be what you would like to achieve with the land. Where would you like the land to be, and what are the steps to get you there?
Goals and objectives are related to everything else that we do. To me, a management goal is where we want to be. In contrast to that, the objectives bridge the gap, okay? Such that if we accomplish all of the objectives, we will be at our goal of plant community.
EBIPM guidelines based on scientific research have been developed and help guide the user through every phase of the framework and through all the key decisions in each step of the model. Applying ecologically based invasive plant management provides an introduction and overview of the entire EBIPM process. You can download or request a free copy online at www.ebipm.org. Once you have your goals and objectives in place, it's time to take the first step in the EBIPM process. It's almost impossible to know how to get where you want to go without knowing where you are to begin with. That's why the first step in the EBIPM framework is to complete a rangeland health assessment, which is more fully explained in the BLM's technical reference Interpreting Indicators of Rangeland Health.
The assessment process is going to do 2 things that are very important to setting goals and objectives. And the first is that it's going to tell us the current state of the community, what is the ecological status, and it will also tell us, secondly, what the causes of succession are within the current plant community. What is driving that plant community to be what it is or to change in a certain direction?
If you have an idea that you want to do something to rangeland, you have a lot of tools in your toolbox, but you kind of want to be addressing the problem, what's the problem? And so the rangeland health assessment actually helps you identify that problem.
The Rangeland Health Assessment is a 5-step process that provides a qualitative assessment of rangeland condition based on 3 main attributes.
So what we've done is divided rangeland health into 3 attributes: soil site stability, hydrologic function, and biotic integrity. In simple terms, erosion, water, and the living community.
As part of Rangeland Health Assessment, you'll complete an evaluation sheet and an evaluation matrix to rate the 17 indicators, which will describe how far removed a site is from the ecological site description of its expected natural state. A completed Rangeland Health Assessment provides a preliminary evaluation of a site at the ecological level. EBIPM takes the assessment 1 step further with a simple worksheet from identifying the problem to identifying the cause of the problem.
So that's really the approach that we're trying to to get at, basically identify the problem, identify the cause of the problem, fix the problem.
EBIPM does this by providing the EBIPM assessment worksheet, which categorizes the 17 indicators into the 3 causes of succession: site availability, species availability, and species performance. Once the ratings for the indicators are transferred to the EBIPM assessment worksheet, we can identify the cause of the problem, which can help us get to our ultimate goal: fixing the problem. The EBIPM assessment guidelines offer a detailed step-by-step description of how to complete the Rangeland Health Assessment and incorporate that into EBIPM. Go to www.ebipm.org to download or order your free copy today. One of our problems as land managers has been a failure to recognize that when we see invasive species begin to establish, the weeds themselves are not the actual cause of the problem. The weeds are merely a symptom of the problem. The real problem is, more often than not, an ecological process in disrepair. These ecological processes in disrepair are what drive a plant community to change. EBIPM narrows all the possible reasons for invasion and change into 3 specific causes for plant community change: site availability, species availability, and species performance. Site availability refers primarily to the availability of sites in the soil profile, or safe sites.
An area that's beneficial and has the appropriate conditions for a seed to disperse there, establish, and grow, and the plant to persist. If we think about it, first thing a seed needs to do is land in a particular area. Then that seed needs to germinate, it needs to emerge, and then go through some developmental processes as a juvenile plant, eventually getting to an adult plant. So the question is if we understand what the safe site conditions are and what a seed needs to successfully germinate and emerge, are we effectively doing that in our management? But we know we need sites available. Are we actually getting seeds in the sites where they need to be?
These safe sites are created through disturbance. Disturbance can be a result of human disruptions such as recreation, construction, or fire, and it also occurs naturally through wildfire, flood, insect infestation, animal activity, and other processes, including variations in weather.
Disturbance has a temporal aspect based on weather and climate. And what site availability is, how many safe sites you have, is hugely dependent upon weather variability. Where you actually manage is at the level of microclimate. Usually what you're trying to do with managing site availability is to manage the microclimate to create as many safe sites as possible to make it as amenable to successful establishment as possible.
When we're trying to move a plant community from an undesired state to a desired state, our trick is to increase availability of safe sites to our desired plants, but decrease it for our undesired plants.
EBIPM provides science-based principles for managing disturbances to favor the desired species while deterring the invasive species.
If we have an infrequent disturbance regime, that may favor our native species over our invasive species. More intense disturbances are going to more likely favor invasive species. Most of us have seen this. You get a catastrophic fire, heavy disking, you see the invasive species come in. When you disturb systems, nitrogen cycling changes drastically. One is you remove plants that would be taking up nitrogen through the disturbance, but you also stimulate microbial turnover of nitrogen in the soil. And it so happens that our invasive plants are really geared structurally and physiologically to tap into these increases in resource availability.
Disturbance creates safe sites that offer a niche for the establishment of any number of species, depending on what species are present or available.
So when we think about species availability, we really are talking about the ecological processes of dispersal and reproduction. So dispersal, we're trying to think about our weedy species and desirable species dispersing to that site. and taking advantage of those safe sites. But then we're also thinking about what are some of the reproductive characteristics of weedy species and desirable species that may or may not be there. Usually weedy species produce a lot of seeds relative to desired native species. The longevity of how long those weedy seeds stay available relative to native seeds that may be out there.
The concept is that by controlling dispersal or the production of undesired weed species, we can impact the composition of the vegetation that's on that given site. We know from the literature and the research that's been done that preventing weeds from establishing in the first place is our most economical method of weed management. Different weed species have different mechanisms for dispersal. They're well adapted. I think it's always a good basic activity to think about what species am I trying to manage and what are the adaptations that allow it to be successful in dispersing itself across the landscape. If you want some excitement, you can get one of these off the website, which is the weed wheel. And it's kind of fun because it talks about the mechanisms of dispersal, so whether it's animals, vehicles, insects, wind, or cell, and then the locations that you're dealing with, whether roads, waterways, or trails, or some of the adaptations for seed dispersal. You match the colors up and it gives you some ideas to think about as to what are some of the prevention techniques that could be employed to reduce or prevent the spread of weed species across the landscape. There is another level of prevention, and that is this idea of weed prevention areas. And I think it's a shift in thinking because it's really trying to put emphasis back on that we need to spend money on prevention as well as management. Because prevention is our cheapest tool. In some cases, it might be our only hope of success in preserving certain landscapes.
The EBIPM guideline establishing a weed prevention area provides a guide of the steps and the resources to initiate and develop a weed prevention area so communities can keep valuable rangeland free from invasion. You can request or download your free copy at www.ebipm.org. The key with species availability is to increase the dispersal and reproductive capability of desired species while decreasing that of the invasive species.
If we can shift the balance back from the amount of weed seed that's available to the amount of desirable seed that's available, then we can have an impact on the composition of that community. We can help it to shift back to something that's more functional and more desirable.
In attempting to shift that balance, it's absolutely vital to consider how well a given species will perform. Species performance involves the traits and processes that various species employ to capture and utilize resources to maintain and increase population size.
Plants have the same exact problem we do. They have to decide how to balance risk and return in their investments. If your unit of currency is money, you're deciding how to use that money. What you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis is balancing your risk and return. Plants are dealing with that on a day-to-day basis too. They're trying to balance their risk and return. For our invasives in general, we see thinner leaves and thinner roots, which corresponds to higher specific leaf area, higher specific root length. So for every unit of carbon an invasive plant fixes, they can make more leaf area. So the invasive plants are getting a higher rate of return. They're not necessarily fixing more carbon per unit leaf area or acquiring more nitrogen or water per unit root area. What they're doing is constructing that biomass more efficiently and getting a higher rate of return on their investment.
Annuals are species that invest all of the resources that they acquire in a single growing season into one bout of reproduction because they've got one shot to make it in this world before they're done. And consequently, these annual species are wimpy. Bromus is dead before the temperature gets much above 75 degrees, the soil still holds 10% water content when bromus senesces. It is not a particularly hardy species, but it's great at acquiring resources under the conditions under which it evolved. Our perennials are on the other side of that spectrum. These are species that need to persist for many, many years in the environment, so they need to build tissues that are tough and that withstand the rigors of a hot, dry summer.
Seed production, survival, and growth integrated over the lifespan of your plant is everything that's going to go into species performance, ultimately determining how our plant communities are going to change.
When we understand the variables that determine a plant's performance in a given environment, we can manage to favor desired species and hinder invasive species. Now, these are merely the basics of species performance, species availability, and site availability. For more detailed information on the causes of plant community change, the processes that affect those changes, and the associated ecological principles, see our EBIPM guideline applying ecologically based invasive plant management, available at www.ebipm.org.
We've come to some agreement that there's 3 general drivers of community change. You've gone and done an initial rangeland health assessment, and what we're asking for is there evidence of these processes, these causes being present or absent, and if they're damaged or they need to be addressed, which processes do we need to talk about and address in our management, and if we decide that something needs to be addressed, some processes are damaged, how do we tie in our understanding of ecology with what we actually do on the ground?
That is precisely the next step in the EBIPM process, using the ecological principles as rules of thumb to decide the best tools and strategies for managing invasive species.
What we've done for you is created ecological principles that provide targets. These targets are, okay, if I want healthy, native functioning systems, then these are the things I need to try to achieve.
The ecological principles in the EBIPM framework were developed from scientific pursuits and can be considered rules of thumb when considering management of invasive species. The approach integrates general ecological principles to provide managers a crucial link in choosing the best management tools and strategies for modifying the ecological processes. While many of the principles were discussed earlier in this video, the EBIPM guideline, Ecological Principles for Invasive Plant Management, offers a more comprehensive explanation of the scientific principles in the process of creating a management plan. Download or request your copy today at www.ebipm.org.
In land management, what we have to do is take the principles of our underlying science and apply them, and rather than focus on the tool, we focus on the principle and we use the tool to execute the principle.
A completed assessment indicates the causes of change and the processes not functioning. The ecological principles provide the direction for what the treatments should accomplish, and the management should be designed to realize the principle. For example,
here's the ecological process that needs amending or modifying. Here's the direction based upon principle as to how to do it, and that's how you might consider doing it as a manager. You can consider other ways, but that's at least a clear linkage between management and the ecological principle.
managers are familiar with the common and effective tools and strategies available in managing invasive species and, through their own knowledge and experience, have a good idea of the treatments that may work.
So EBIPM, in its essence, is really trying to reincorporate the science back into management so that we're making decisions based upon scientific principles.
The fifth step in the EBIPM framework is to design and execute a plan using adaptive management.
Basically what we're talking about is learning by doing in the face of uncertainty. What it's telling us is that the systems that we're dealing with are very dynamic, and what we have to do is try something out, learn from it, make adjustments, and keep doing that as a kind of an iterative process. What adaptive management is trying to do is reduce those uncertainties. If we can reduce the uncertainties, we can improve our management.
There are a number of characteristics that make adaptive management valuable to land managers, and the process consists of 8 steps which are outlined in Adaptive Management for Invasive Annual Grasses, available at www.ebipm.org. Now, if you want to learn more about how to implement adaptive management, look for the 3rd video in our Implementing EBIPM series, which will describe adaptive management more fully.
If you use traditional techniques for managing, you're going to be successful 1 in 12 times. Okay, this is actual data. If you use this system to make your decision, you're going to be successful 2 out of 3 times. That's a huge difference. And you have a scientific basis. You can defend this anywhere you go because these are all established in the literature. And the likelihood that your outcome is going to be better is multiple times. And then what you can do is, as you apply your adaptive management, you can continue to improve what you're doing over time.